Hello friends. Welcome back to Edition Ibs. In today's video we gonna talk about 10 horrifying, weird, and crazy experiments conducted on humans by crazy researchers. Since 19th century, numerous human experiments were performed around the world, which were later characterized as unethical experiments because they were often performed illegally, without the knowledge, consent, or informed consent of the test-subjected person. Regrettably, many of these test subjects, so-called human beings, were died as a result of those experiments, while many others were executed after the experiments were completed in order to study the effect of post-mortem. Those who survived were often lasted with serious injuries, suffering, permanent disability, weakened bodies, and mental distress. Well, now let's watch some of the disturbing human experiments performed in the history, which are not something the average person would like to think too much about it. Number 1 in the list is the human experimentation in the Soviet Union. Beginning in 1921 and continuing for most of the 21st century, the Soviet Union employed poison laboratories known as Laboratory 1, Laboratory 12, and Laboratory Chimera as research facilities of the secret police agency. And also, these research facilities were not openly acknowledged or displayed. Prisoners from the Gulag, which is a forced labor camp situated in Soviet Union, were exposed to a number of deadly poisons, the purpose of which was to find a tasteless and smell-less chemical that could not be detected in post-mortem. Men and women of varying ages and physical conditions were brought to the laboratories and given the poisons as medication or part of a meal or drink. Therefore, the ultimate result from the experiment would be plenty of dead Gulag prisoners. Second disturbing human experiment is the Nazi medical experiments. During Second World War, the Nazis performed medical experiments on adults and children who were imprisoned in concentration camps. Prisoners in these death camps were subjected to evil crimes in the form of military advancement, medical and pharmaceutical advancement, and racial and population advancement. These experiments intended for benefit the military as well as hypothermia studies. Hypothermia is a medical condition that occurs when you loses your body temperature faster than it can produce temperature, causing a dangerously low body temperature. Prisoners were sinked into ice water or seawater in an effort to ascertain how long a downed pilot could survive in similar conditions. Not surprisingly, some of these prisoners were died due to dehydration. The disturbing experiment number 3 is Dr. John Watson's Little Albert experiment. In 1920, Dr. Watson conducted an emotional conditioning experiment on a 9-month-old baby whom they nicknamed as Albert B. The purpose of the experiment is to prove their theory that people all are born as blank slates or cover that can be shaped. However, researchers did their experiments along with the baby and a small furry white rat. It turned out that Albert wasn't a healthy subject. He showed signs of behavioral and neurological impairment. Unfortunately, he never learned to talk or walk either and only lived up to age 6. He died due to hydrocephalus, simply means water on the brain. He also suffered from bacterial infections, which he may have acquired accidentally during treatments, or the baby may have been horrifyingly and intentionally injected as a part of another experiment. Experiment number 4 is San Quentin medical experiments. From 1913 to 1951, Dr. Leo Stanley, chief surgeon at California's San Quentin prison, used prison inmates as test subjects in a variety of strange and unusual medical experiments. Stanley's experiments included sterilization. Sterilization means surgeries which makes a person unable to produce children. And also, experiments on potential treatments for the Spanish flu. In one particularly disturbing experiment, Stanley performed testicle transplants on living prisoners using testicles from executed prisoners. And also in some cases, they used testicles from goats and boars. The disturbing experiment number 5 is the Russian sleep experiment. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based chamber. The experimental gas was used to keep them awake and preventing from sleep. They also implanted circuit cameras, microphones and 5-inch thick glass windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, beds to sleep, running water and toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 people for over a month. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming and ran around the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. The most surprising thing about this behavior is, even though the second member also started to scream, the other captives didn't react to them at all. However, after a while, the voices promptly stopped, and the chamber became dead quiet. On the 15th day, the stimulant gas was replaced by fresh air. The results were chaotic. The first captive who screamed was dead. The other inmates had been seriously damaged and injured. Flesh torn off their bodies and stuffed into the floor drain. They seemed to have ripped open their own abdomens and even eaten their own flesh. They refused to leave by force, fighting back with a powerful aggression none of the researchers could have imagined. They fought furiously against being removed and anesthetized. One even tore his own muscles and ripped his bones apart during the struggle. When they asked why they had mutilated themselves, each gave the exact same answer: "I must remain awake." Experiment number 6 is the Holmesburg prison experiment. In 1951, Dr. Albert Kligman, a dermatologist at the University of Pennsylvania, began experimenting on inmates at Philadelphia's Holmesburg prison. Over 20 years, around 1,200 prisoners were willingly allowed Kligman to use their bodies in experiments. Dr. Kligman experiments involved toothpaste, deodorant, shampoo, skin creams, detergents, liquid diets, eye drops, foot powders and hair dyes. Though the tests required constant biopsies and painful procedures, according to the reports, none of the prison inmates experienced a long-term harm. Human test number 7 is experiment on newborn babies. In 1960s, researchers at the University of California began an experiment to study changes in blood pressure as well as blood flow. The researchers used 113 newborn babies, ranging in age from 1 hour to 3 days old as test subjects. In one experiment, a catheter was inserted, which means a soft hollow tube was passed into the human bladder. It was to drain urine through the umbilical arteries and into the aorta. The newborn's feet were then synced into ice water for the purpose of testing aortic pressure. Disturbing test number 8 is Unit 731. From 1937 to 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army developed a secret biological and chemical warfare research experiment called Unit 731. It was based in the large city of Harbin. Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most extremely wicked war crimes in the history. Chinese and Russian subjects, such as men, women, children, infants, elderly, and pregnant women, were subjected to these experiments. Experiments included removal of organs from a live body, cut off body parts by surgical operation for the study of blood loss, germ warfare attacks, and weapons testing. An estimated 3,000 of enemy soldiers and civilians were used as guinea pigs, which means used as a subject for experiments. Some of the more horrific experiments included operations on live human bodies for the purpose of scientific research, without anesthesia and pressure chambers to see how much a human could take before his eyes popped out. Human experiment number 9 is radioactive experiments on pregnant women. Shortly after World War II, with the intention of obtaining a leading and important position in Cold War, many American medical researchers were preoccupied with the idea of radioactivity and chemical warfare. In an experiment at Vanderbilt University, 829 pregnant women were given vitamin drinks. They were told that the vitamin would improve the health of their unborn babies. Instead, the drinks contained radioactive iron. The researchers were studying how quickly the radioactive isotope crossed into the placenta. The placenta is an organ that develops in uterus during pregnancy. At least 7 of the babies later died from cancers and leukemia. And also, the women themselves experienced rashes, bruises, anemia, loss of hair and tooth. The last experiment in the list is mustard gas tested on American military. In 1943, the U.S. Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. 17 and 18-year-old boys were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory they were told that the experiment involved mustard gas. The participants suffered severe external and internal burns. At the end of the day, they were ignored by the Navy. And also, in some cases, they were threatened by political and military officials. To conclude, human experimentation is a big concern that should not be taken lightly. It is very fortunate that today we have the Nuremberg Code and other laws to protect us from unethical human experimentation. Unlike the people of the past, it is important to remind ourselves of this topic as it compromises human rights. No excuse or apology, no matter how lengthy, can fully repair the minds, bodies, and lives lost due to experiments. Let's never make the same mistakes again and always remember the people who went through the atrocities that occurred throughout our history.